Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today's guest is Curtis Duggan. He's a remote work advocate and founder of Waviator.com, one of the top newsletters for digital nomads. Curtis, how's it going, man?
It's going good, man. I'm excited to be talking to My Latin Life. You're one of my favorite Twitter accounts, and almost every tweet I take a look, whether it's just breaking down a country, a city, or whatever. You always got good nuggets on there about Latin life.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I appreciate that.
I mean, we might get into this in the business I'm in, like doing a remote work advocacy blog and sort of writing articles and talking about remote work. You can definitely see where certain personalities come down, and there's maybe on one side of the spectrum there's sort of more I think it's all valuable, but like on one side there's more corporate, kind of like remote work change is coming to the office and here's what leaders are saying. And then on the other end of the spectrum, and I don't think you're like all the way on the other end of the spectrum, but it's like it's a little bit more like, hey, here's the straight dirt on this country and its tax policy. Here's an awesome town to set up a short-term stay in. Oh, here's an awesome city where you can actually stay the full year. Here's the differences between Argentina and Brazil, et cetera, et cetera. And it's in a voice that's just really natural, really trustworthy, and really straight to the point, not some kind of like lofty thought leader that's sort of trying to, write a New Yorker essay. You're just right to the point.
How did you get into being a remote work thought leader or a digital nomad advocate, however you want to term it? How did that all kick off for you?
For remote work, it kind of happened by accident in the sense that I got into venture backed Silicon Valley startup world maybe 10 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, really, when a certain company, after several attempts to kind of kick off a company in the growth, with the growth lens, I did raise money for a health tech startup that started out in British Columbia and Vancouver and then moved its headquarters to New York, where our market was in the United States. And kind of over the course of 5 years, built a remote or hybrid friendly company with eventually, like in terms of including all the part-time people we had and the full-time people, we had 40, 50 people all
Hmm.
around the world at this, venture-backed startup that eventually was acquired. And we had the whole thing of like, we're not checking your 9 to 5. We're all on different time zones. We're going to use Slack and Zoom to communicate. But we never thought of ourselves. I wasn't waking up being like, I'm part of the remote work movement. It was like, I'm trying to build this business and grow it and eventually sell it. Uh, and so that happened. I became the CEO of a company that was across 6 different time zones and was, building like how we work and collaborate together remotely. And being the CEO of a startup, you go to California to raise money, you go meet a customer, you stay in a hotel, you go to a trade show, especially in enterprise sales. There's a natural, it's not digital nomadism, but it was like, yes, I'm working from all these different places that aren't the office headquarters every day because I'm traveling to get stuff done for the company. So that journey, was 4 or 5 years, and that was like sort of just naturalized me to remote work. The digital nomad part and kind of reading about this movement, once I sold the company, I stopped thinking about chronic disease and health tech, which was the industry I was in. I was thinking about it every day, 12 hours a day for 4 years. Once we made the sale, I kind of had that moment you have when you kind of, lift your head up. You've gone through something that's almost as long as high school or college or whatever in growing and selling a startup. And now it's like, what do I do next? It's the summer after college. It's the summer after high school. And so I started reading about some of the stuff that I wouldn't focus on when I was heads down in my company, but I had kind of this breathing room. Also, the pandemic happened, and I started reading about the digital nomad movement. And then with COVID, going somewhere and thinking like Arizona, and then back to my hometown in on Vancouver Island, I'd go somewhere thinking like, okay, for the next 90 days, I'll just wait it out here, and then it's not. I don't really want to get an apartment somewhere or buy real estate anywhere because who knows with this pandemic. And then I just kept changing, like kept thinking, okay, I'll go here, I'll wait 90 days, and then maybe this wave will be over. And then the pandemic lasted a long time. And so for 2020, 2021, I was living it as well, and started consulting, started doing side projects, started working on things. And really for the last 2 years have just been I've been totally immersed in the digital nomad lifestyle, both all the chatter and sort of the articles and stuff, but also living it and working from different places. Worked from Croatia, Montenegro, Costa Rica, Mexico now at various times. But I still, I'm not a 12-month of the year nomad. I still have a base in Canada where I'm from. I'm Canadian.
Would you be able to give us a sort of overview of what the remote work digital nomad community looks like at a high level and what some of those subcategories are?
Sure. Yeah, I would say starting with the OGs, I'll call them. I think that there's a sizable, small relative to the world population and relative to the remote work population, but a small and vocal group that are the OGs, digital nomads who were nomading before 2020, before 2019, and pioneered the first real wave. I mean, there's waves and waves of backpackers in the 90s and 2000s, but the first mobile internet enabled wave was the 2010s, when people had the smartphones that they could use and the laptops and the high speed internet to really actually work and get stuff done. And so that's encapsulated by people who, spent their entire 20s in Bali and Chiang Mai and Lisbon and different places and kind of have this long history. They're, they often were kind of looking for cheap living geo arbitrage being the idea that you can make money in a top tier salary bracket currency from a U.S. company or a UK or Canadian
Hmm.
company, but pay living costs somewhere that are lower, like in Mexico or in Brazil somewhere where the rent is cheaper than in Toronto and New York. And a lot of them sort of leveraged that and were a bit frugal, and perhaps like kind of running side hustles, and many of them were entrepreneurs. So the OGs kind of have all these opinions. They have this mental model of what nomading should be, and I think that's great. They pioneered the space, but they're also, it's sort of flooded now in the 2020s with all kinds of different groups. So moving more quickly and kind of going quickly through them, I would say the high income employee is more new. So 4 years ago, it was mostly like freelancers, entrepreneurs, hustlers. Now you've got someone who's kind of the Deloitte, Microsoft, Shopify, what have you, worker, high income, no interest in entrepreneurship. But 6 months ago or 12 months ago, they just heard like, we're remote everywhere forever. Think of an Airbnb employee who just heard like, yeah, you're remote everywhere forever. They're looking for probably not the backpackers inside info on where you get $2 beers and sleep in a dorm and have the best parties. They might be looking for like, where is stable housing with fast internet where I can still work for Airbnb and do my professional 50-hour a week job. And so that professional class, I don't know, I'll call them like high income, new money or whatever into the nomad world. There's definitely I would say the tax and optimization crowd, like you mentioned, the idea that a crowd that has a libertarian bent, very understandable drive of all humans to sort of not have money taken from them. Especially in
Hmm.
this group, they've taken it to, I would say, kind of very very interesting lengths in terms of kind of looking at the idea that a paradigm has shifted, and in the words of what's his name, Andrew from the Nomad Capitalist, like, you can go where you're treated best. And a lot of people are looking at that treated best from, in this case, mostly from the point of view of tax, but also for other reasons, lifestyle, all kinds of things. And so I'm always excited to follow the discussion on some of this stuff, and you tweet about it too, around passports, residencies, tax optimization, because I think like some of the other groups didn't really care about that. The workers just like, how do I do this so my company lets me do this, and what HR form do I have to fill out if I'm going to be in Montenegro? What do I do? They're not necessarily saying like, I'm renouncing X passport or going here and doing citizenship strategies. They just want to like make their high salary somewhere. I think over time, many people will start to like get into the tax optimization group. Another group I would say is like, so there's a very small group, but it's like, I would include sort of the remote us in it in some way, but it's like remote work influencers and thought leaders, in the sense of like, there's people who are passionate about the remote work movement as it's happening,
The
and
super
sort of
cycle.
the super cycle. Like I would say a guy I listen to, I'm sure you do a little bit too, is like Chase from Doist, who's the head of remote. And like you'll find a lot of this crowd at conferences like Running Remote, where it's like, let's talk about what's going on and analyze how companies are navigating the remote work movement. Not
Hmm.
necessarily interested in tax stuff, not necessarily interested in like the coolest places, but more like, how does a team of 12 people work together and that kind of thing.
Or like hiring internationally, and
Yeah.
the sort of like the what's it called, the shortening gap in salary gap between, say, an American and Nigerian worker, in terms of that salary gap will get closer as
Yeah.
there's more opportunities for them to get educated and learn online skills and so forth. So yeah, there's lots to like unpack on the super cycle for sure.
Yeah, and I guess maybe one other group that I'm seeing is um, nomads who weren't part of the cycle before 2020 or before 2019, but are now starting to show up in places like the villages in Madeira and in Pipa now in Brazil and other places where maybe unlike the crowd that's like, yeah, just give me the inside info how to get to Latin America and kind of like operate solo and maybe with a few bros. I think there's some intrepid people that are really into that kind of inside info and they'll follow certain accounts on that side of things. But there's still yet another group that's kind of like, yeah, I would like to join, a remote year or a, a unsettled or Wi-Fi tribe month-long retreat and
Hmm.
kind of go through the group tour model, except for in this case, like it's like the group nomad model.
Yeah, like
Join a village, join a
community driven nomads, I guess.
yeah. They're not hardcore independent on crypto or tax or just
Co-living
whatever.
people.
Yeah. They're just in a different psychological group, I would say, and they appreciate some of the
Yep.
group tour stuff.
And there was even, and there's more. We can keep spitballing here. I think it's interesting. Like even just snowbirds. So as Canadians, we know that the snowbird community well preceded remote work, and I'm sure all those Canadians in Florida, they found some way to make phone calls back home, and keep on top of their affairs, and conduct business and so forth. And so I think like what's it called, retirees and snowbirds is a thing as well. And you would see the equivalent in Europe, right? Like probably tons of people from Northern Europe might have a place in the Algarve in Mexico or on the islands like Madeira, like you said. So I think that's another piece.
Yeah, definitely. I would say just to what I've observed, and I kind of say, oh yeah, like similar kind of thing. Like just like snowbirds in North America can head down to the southern United States or to Mexico, and the same thing can happen in Europe. What I've actually seen and experienced now is that it's actually it's harder in Europe to do that. Like that, this is something a year ago I would have like said some line about how Europeans can go south. What I've realized actually being there at a few different times in the fall and turning into the winter is like even on the Mediterranean, there are a few places like there's some of the Spanish islands and there's maybe the very very south of Greece, but even on Crete, as south as you can get at the farthest down in Montenegro and Albania on the peninsula there, it's still not like going to the tropics, So Europeans, it'll be interesting to see what they do in the middle of winter. Definitely, yeah, Algarve, some Spanish islands, some Greek islands stay pretty good throughout the winter. But it'll be interesting to see whether Europeans want to snowboard. If they want to snowboard for 6 months, whether they'll make the trip out to Dubai or Asia or the Caribbean and Central America. Just because I found that like my what's the word? My impression of like how easy it would be to snowboard in Europe was changed a little bit in the last year when I saw, oh, it's still kind of the off season here, even in the winter, even in the south.
Yep, definitely. There's tons of other little communities too, like and they all sort of intersect and they're related. And I find that my Latin life's definitely at the intersection of a couple different of these communities. Um, I think another one is micronations, and I've been having fun on Twitter just attempting to support some of these micronations, where people will um, basically like challenge the notion of what is a country by starting their own country. And so there's been some successful examples of this over the years. There's Sealand, there's Liberland, which is on the border of Serbia and Croatia. It's an island. There's Slowjamistan, which is in California. Some guy bought like 20 acres and just put up I don't know, put up a flagpole and everything, and kind of started his own country, and built an email list, and quote unquote sold like citizenship, but in like a fun way. Um, and so I think it's very interesting because I think it all ties in where micronations are sort of challenging our idea of like what is a country, and there are countries that have like semi um what's it called, recognition at the world scale. You can look at like Somaliland, which is a part of Somalia officially, but it was a British protectorate and it's totally independent on the ground. And there's all these sort of like examples. And I think these micronations, if you take a look at them, they provide a sort of interesting glimpse into what the future might hold.
Yeah, it's definitely, some of them are satire, some of them are kind of a novel experiment to prove a political point, and then some of them seem to be these actually funded projects, like venture backed Praxis, a possible city on the Mediterranean that kind of is rethinking a city from scratch, and then Safety Wings, Plumia is still mostly just like sort of ideas that are being talked about, but ostensibly in 10 years the idea of like some kind of not transnational but just sort of independently national internet country. So from cities to regions to countries, I think it'd be interesting to see. The It feels like the world is probably not going to get more globalized and turn into bigger empires and bigger countries, and we might see something that would be shocking 50 years ago but isn't shocking now, which is we could break off into smaller and smaller countries that govern themselves in a certain way. And crypto's had a few setbacks in the last year, so it's not quite as frothy as a year or two before, but still, the novel approaches to money, how wealth and money kind of is
Yeah, exactly.
delineated and
Like
distributed.
how crypto is coming up at the exact same time as remote work, and sort of these confluence of concepts and technologies are creating a lot of new possibilities.
Yeah, the thing that I want to sit down with, like, I need to talk to some of these people that are doing the micronations, because I just want to get like there's some of the initial questions I want to get out of the way. Like, okay, what about an army? Like, if the country that's surrounding you starts rolling in the cavalry, all of your sort of notions of how your country will kind of, you don't have an army, so what are you going to do? So, and I'm not saying that because I don't believe in these things. I'm just kind of thinking like, um, why do we have states? And often it's like, it's an army with a currency. Yeah, there's definitely like the biggest, like kind of nations as we think of them were mostly kingdoms before 1648. And not to be kind of like a history nerd, but after 1648 the 30 Years War ended, and we kind of created the first idea of these nationalist, often ethnicity based nation states, starting in Western Europe, and then many countries around the world followed that model through colonialism and decolonialism. And I think we're getting like the first shift of that, the first real shift since 1648, in this decade. There have been revolutions since then. There have been all kinds of changes, but fundamentally, everything has still been about like, uh, international law delineating borders, and you declare war or you don't declare war. And with crypto, with remote work, with the network state, we finally have something that's actually new, and not just sort of a different versions of what we've set up 300 or 400 years ago. And so it's going to be, I mean, it's an exciting time in human history.
Yeah, I think just becoming a digital nomad, you end up learning a lot about the world because you have to start learning about visas, and then that kind of puts you down the rabbit hole of learning about residencies. You learn about how, okay, I have different rights in different countries. Here it's 30 days visa free. Here it's 90. Here it's 180. Oh, but there's actually countries with open borders. There might be some countries I can slip out of without an exit stamp. Maybe if I have two passports, I can use one, do a visa run, and then enter on the other, right? And so there's all, it just keeps stacking up, and yeah, I shouldn't say
Yeah.
too much, but yeah, it keeps stacking up, and you learn a lot about about countries and sort of the inter dynamics and geopolitics and all the rest of it?
Yeah, well, you're hitting on. I think there's definitely the unplugging from the matrix aspect of it. Even just like I'm Canadian, so if you think of like your typical Canadian or like a person in the UK with the NHS, something like going to the dentist, you know, when you're in these countries and you kind of grow up, you become a teenager, you get a job, you learn how the things work, and then you just keep growing up and working. You get things like, oh, I have to have this extended benefits from this employer, and then that's like my pass to go to the dentist twice a year, and then the dentist does this, and I have to get these benefits, or I don't go to the dentist, and you don't like no one tells you through all of that, like you're allowed to just pay to go to the dentist somewhere else. Like no one says that. No one says that's allowed because why would they? You're just living in the, you're in Canada. You pay the payroll taxes. You got the provincial government gives you the main healthcare. Oh, then there's extra healthcare. Of course, in the United States, it's even different. It's you shop around for it, or your employer gives it to you, and whether it's healthcare or just sort of saving for retirement, tax advantaged retirement accounts, how to build wealth that you need 30 years from now, you kind of just get the story that's the mainstream story of your country, because it's just assumed that, even if you're not going to, there's just this old assumption that's now wrong, that you want to and need to be in this payroll tax, social security, extended benefits system for life, And so you go to the bank, you sit down, and a retail banker in any of these G7 countries will just kind of explain, you want this, you want that, 401k in the US, RRSP in Canada, whatever it is in other countries. No one's no one's teaching you about the things that, all of our friends on Twitter that understand all the residencies in the banking and my Latin Life stuff that my Latin Life's really good at explaining on the internet. That's just, no one talks about that. And so I think it's totally unplugging from the matrix, whether it's exit stamps, taxes, health benefits, getting certain, all that stuff. And I think, not to get too conspiratorial, but like there's just an incentive in the inside the matrix to make it all sound scary. Like, oh, someone wants to go to Dubai and have a certain mole removed, or they want to go to Costa Rica for a dentist appointment. And it's like, oh my God, you're not getting a small cosmetic procedure or a dentist appointment or whatever in the town you grew up in with like the system that what if something goes wrong? And it's just kind of like, you know there's more than one narrative out there, and there's all kinds of countries out there, and it's not just 5 countries that are awesome and then a giant third world. Like that's a 100-year-old idea that's just not true anymore, and it never was true.
So, Curtis, what would you say are some of the biggest preconceived notions or limiting beliefs that people have that they quickly overcome when they become a digital nomad or start working online?
Oh, I think there's a few. So one is like, um, I won't be able to make friends or speak the language or have a normal life. And I think that's part of thinking like you're on vacation or something. Like I'm going somewhere where they speak a different language. So why would I, how am I going to integrate? And whether you want to learn the local language deeply or simply connect with other, let's call them expats, digital nomads, remote workers, in a lot of these places, it's much easier than you think to have a social life, whatever kind of social life you want to have, whether it's just community fun or dating, or, extensive dating or what have you. Um, these days, it's much easier to do that. Second, I think it's the financial side. Like most people have a preconceived notion or just almost a bit of brainwashing around like, well, I have my bank. It's this bank. It's my checking account. I have online banking. I have money in it. I have a savings account and this other thing over here. And like, what if my debit card doesn't work? Or where am I going to put my money? You know, it's fine to go somewhere for a week or two on vacation because you pull out the cash and you put it in an envelope and you have like a travel mindset. But how am I going to be in somewhere for 6 months? And so things that with fintech companies, with local bank accounts, with whatever, are probably like they're not totally dead simple. You might have to do a little bit of research, but it's not crazy to sort of live with day-to-day checking and financial your money available to you in a way that's convenient. That's fine. Like that's easier than people think, and they think it's really, really hard. Same with healthcare. They think it's really, really hard to get covered. our newsletter, Waviator, my newsletter, waviator.com, has had a sponsor, our primary and only sponsor for the year that we've been in existence. We really appreciate them. Insured Nomads. They're a global, nomadic health insurance company for remote workers, nomads, and expats that gives comprehensive coverage. That's not just the disaster travel coverage; it's the real local coverage, as if you had healthcare where you are. Not like, oh, yeah, we'll fly you home and then let your home healthcare take care of it in an emergency. So not trying to plug them too much, but just on that point, healthcare is
Hmm.
another thing. And then finally, just like there's like output and productivity and work. The idea that people are like, well, if I'm not, first of all, a lot of people can't fathom not being at the office headquarters of where they work and working even just remotely from home 10 miles from the office, let alone like, what am I going to do if I'm 3 hours off in a different time zone? And for you and me, we're even talking about async, like we're talking about what if 10 people are in 10 different time zones? A lot of people simply just don't function or don't have the notion that they can sort of like get on a computer, you know, in a living room of an Airbnb in Argentina or Mexico and sort of have the same kind of productivity. I don't even know if I'm using the right word, productivity, almost just like accountability, or what will my boss think? I think like what will my boss think is a big one, rightly or wrongly. So
Mm.
there's all those things, and then that's even just short term. And then I won't dive too deep into it, but there's also kind of the long term thing, like stopping people from being long term remote workers. I think a big one is just like the healthcare and retirement. What am I going to do? I have these like investment accounts. Like I kind of have these golden handcuffs of my birth country that sort of make it, there's a system for retiring eventually, where if I went somewhere else, I'd be breaking that system. And far and away, I think that's the biggest one. Preconceived notion is just like I'm gonna screw something up if I uh, leave my country for too long, because my country's set up with its own system. And then of course there's just like, what about my family and friends? I'm going to be away from them, which I don't know if that's a preconceived notion. That's just something to balance. And I hope for a lot of people, something where they can convince their family and friends that it's not so bad, and start having, groups of family and friends, and, traveling together, relocating for 6 months or 12 months together, as more of us convince our normie friends that this isn't so bad.
Yeah, so you mentioned the Waviator newsletter. What are some of the big themes that you touch upon in the newsletter and that you try to communicate to digital nomads on a weekly basis? Are you giving them updates on new visas and so forth, or yeah, just like news in the industry? Or walk us through some of the main things that you talk about there.
Yeah. So, I mean, earlier in the pod, we talked about kind of the spectrum from um, deep remote work leadership, that's just kind of like about trends and ideas and social stuff. And then, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, there's just like, hey, this is a great city. There's a party next week. You should go to it. The kind of really straight talk about like, what, in November, it's rainy season here. Don't go there. Go here instead. If you think this is good, there's tourists in it. Go somewhere else. So there's that kind of thing. And so the reason I bring that up is I would like to think that I think Waviator's positioned about halfway in between those, in the sense that I write the newsletter like I'm talking about it. I say, hey, it's me. I'm writing the newsletter. Here's what happened this week. It's a bit of almost like a SNL weekend update without the jokes, on, what I think are the top 4 or 5 different stories. So we don't always report every single new digital nomad visa. If a new digital nomad visa has something unique about it, I'll talk about it. If one of these fancy thought leadership articles has an interesting angle that I think is new and not just regurgitated, I'll link to that article and comment on it.
Hmm.
But it's a first person narrative kind of weekly update from me. I'll pick 4 or 5 news articles. I'll comment on them in my voice. It's pretty informal, casual voice. It's not total bro talk, but it's also not total corporate talk. Something in between, and really just trying to, like, my audience is probably not the super savvy nomad insider. It's the person who's done it once, is looking to get into it, and wants just like the basic facts about what's happening each week. And then if they want to learn more than the basic facts, they can go check out our longer blog articles at the website, which is more kind of like evergreen.
Hmm.
But I like to think of it like, if you were just going to pick up kind of like the coffee news 5-minute update kind of thing that you have what are the top 5 headlines, and not just the headlines, but a bit of commentary on them, then you check out Waviator and just keep updated every week.
Yeah. And it sounds like you guys are also building communities as well. What's your vision for communities for digital nomads?
Yeah, so I think it's actually there's fewer communities than you would expect, given how big this movement is getting and how many people are out there looking at remote work and digital nomadism. It's still kind of the communities are still kind of these online communities that are maybe behind a gate. You have people joining kind of nomad sites and joining a Slack or a Discord. You do also have the villages like what Gonzalo Hall does with NomadX and
Hmm.
Madeira, and now in Brazil and in other places. I think those are, um, from what I understand, those are still kind of like government experiments in partnership with Gonzalo's company that are still learning about what the model is, what the business model is. That doesn't mean that they're not real and there's not people there and they're not thriving. But it's almost like what I think is like, okay, I hear about these nomad villages. That's great. Why aren't there 100 of them?
Yeah, we were talking about Gonzalo a little bit, who's the founder of NomadX. And so they're building co living spaces they started in Madeira in Portugal. They built a couple in Portugal. They built one in Cabo Verde, the African island country, and then they just opened up in Brazil in Pipa, which is near the city of Natal. It's like a small surfing community, and I really like what they're doing in terms of co-living. I'm very interested in this other super cycle of co-living that I think is going to continue to grow. I'm on the Outsite newsletter. Outsite's another one of these companies similar to Selina, and Outsite said that they're looking to grow to 300 locations, and they're doing a bit of a capital raise. So they're going to have 300 co-living spaces just outside alone. Selina has over 100 for sure. I had a dinner with Gonzalo in Portugal about a month ago, and I'm sold, man.
Yeah, I think, yeah. So I've been tracking the Selena for sure. I don't know Outside as well. I know of it, but I've kind of even been reading the Selena journey, even down to like the filings they do where they were going to. I think either they have. I don't think they've done it yet, but they
Go
are
public.
were or are planning to go public through a SPAC or reverse merger. Maybe that was kind of a 2021 thing, and their plans have changed. I haven't looked in a while, but suffice to say that like this is huge for certain large players. This is huge. What I think hasn't been figured out yet, or what is that, I've been to Selena, and it's kind of like when I was there were private rooms, but like what I chose to do, this is in Costa Rica, I think one of the ones in Costa Rica, it was kind of like still like a dorm, and it's just like there's so much room to go upscale, and if someone figures this out, it's like this $1 trillion opportunity, but it still feels like really small. Like the vast majority of people I know that are nomading are looking for VRBOs, Airbnbs, short-term rentals, and um, yeah, there's lots of room for co-living to grow. I think they just need to figure out. It's almost like a full cycle of actually maybe renovating buildings and doing things differently needs to happen, and it's hard to move things around in real life. But yeah, I think with the nomad villages, to a certain extent, they're not like real estate developers. Like Selena goes in and says like we're gonna buy this hotel, or take a it's like WeWork, we take a long lease, we're gonna totally gut it and turn it into a Selena. With Gonzalo's villages, it's a little bit more of a leveraging various local apartments and sort of short-term rentals, and then like a co-working space, and bringing a bunch of stuff together. And I think what I think will be powerful is sort of bringing those two together. Selena doesn't really do what Gonzalo does that much. He's like, okay, yeah, there's happy hour and karaoke, but that's not what Gonzalo does. And Gonzalo's not, as of yet, a real estate developer or a real estate player. It's more of a community building thing, which is I think a great place to start. Less capital.
He's putting money into the properties though.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I get it. They're renovating it, but it's sort of like can that get like 100 or 1,000 times accelerated, where there's like 100 nomad villages? But no, I didn't want to make it sound like I don't like they're not. It's more like sort of the scale, like
Hmm.
um, like building, purpose built buildings and totally changing buildings to kind of fit the way the kitchens and bathrooms need to work with co living. And I
Hmm.
know they've done some of that. with the villages.
Yeah, definitely another angle on the space. I thought we'd switch it up and talk a little bit about digital nomad visas. We haven't done a segment yet on My Latin Life where we've had an expert such as yourself come on and talk to us through what is a digital nomad visa, what is the history of digital nomad visas, how did these come about, what are some of the most popular digital nomad visas right now at the moment, and some of the trends and different things you're seeing there. Would you be so kind as to give us that overview?
Sure. Yeah. So digital nomad visas are relatively new. I guess, an important bit of context is that, as we mentioned earlier in the pod, digital nomads have been around for a while, and there was this whole pre 2020, pre 2019 digital nomad movement, the wave before the wave. And a lot of them were doing it in a gray area. So, like, the whole thing of the pre 2020 was, and it still is like this, which is just kind of leveraging some of the things that you've said. You learn as you do it. As you unplug from the matrix, you start to learn. Okay, I've got 180 days here. I can be here for 90 days as a tourist. This country doesn't check if I'm actually working for my clients or my employer. Blah blah blah. And so all the way from outright tax avoidance, in the sense of like the sort of pre 2020, and I'm sure today, kind of like, if I hop between these countries and I give up my residence at home, I can avoid tax. That's sort of on one part of the spectrum. But then everything in between, it was still kind of like, whatever you think about the laws, they're there. And the countries were either kind of like looking the other way or cracking down. There's stories about them cracking down. So what happened during the pandemic, when suddenly this sort of underground movement that didn't really have any visa laws attached to it and was kind of just wink wink happening all around the world, suddenly, when everybody's trapped at home, a few countries said, like, let's actually lean into this a little bit and do make gestures, not just gestures, but actual programs that welcome remote workers and digital nomads to our country. And so a digital nomad visa, it started in Estonia and Barbados and Caribbean islands in 2020. And then the floodgates opened in 2021. Now there's, over 60 or 70 places around the world, if not more, that have some kind of digital nomad visa. And what it is usually, they differ, but usually it's, you can show that you have a nominal income, usually a couple grand a month, and some health insurance, and maybe pass a criminal record check, maybe not. Give some information about yourself, show that you got some money or you're making some money, and you can come here as long as you don't literally work for the local restaurant, the local mechanic, the local jobs. As long as you still have your foreign income, foreign job, foreign remote job, foreign remote business, you're allowed to be here. You can come here. Often you don't have to pay any local tax here, where you have a stamp in your passport or whatever that says, like, this is fine, and you can maybe stay for a year or 2 years. You don't have to do any 180-day switcheroos, 90-day switcheroos. You've got bam, the 1 year Costa Rica digital nomad visa. Come here, open a bank, do what you need to do. You're a temporary resident, go for it. And so, um, let's say, I'm going to steel man and straw man it, like, on the charitable sort of positive end of things, of the viewpoint, it's like, this is great. The countries are finally allowing us to stay. They're removing some of the headaches. Now they're competing with each other for the most attractive conditions, the lowest taxes, the best, most easy application processes. This is great. Countries are now competing for us, for digital nomads. And so that makes the whole experience better. And digital nomad visas are a great thing because it opens up so many possibilities that people would be afraid to do or just wouldn't do because they were either semi-legal or not legal, just in terms of, like, I wish I could just stay here for 2 years, not do any bullshit to, move
Hmm.
around.
Yeah,
On
sort
the
of
negative end. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
legalize their status or regularize their status.
Yeah. That's the positive interpretation. The negative interpretation, which I would say is a majority view among many thought leaders that I know, is that digital nomad visas kind of suck. They aren't appropriate for what people really want, and they're way too rigid around, look, if you're applying for the Croatia year-long digital nomad visa, you're kind of like immigrating just to Croatia for that year, and going through still a bunch of hoops to just kind of still have the rigid type of like one country at a time approach as if you were at home. So like, okay, the Dubai visa is great, but you kind of like have to get it. You have to go there. You have to go to like the Dubai Medical Center, get a medical card, submit your passport to the government, get your passport back a day later. It's still got all of that like immigration visa stuff attached to it. And so the negative criticism is this isn't what we need. Like, we need to be able to dip into a place for 80 days and then go somewhere else, then go somewhere else. Like, if we're going to go 6 or 8 or 10 places throughout the year, it's not a huge step forward to just, oh, now I've got 6, 8, 10 different kind of 6 to 10 hour paperwork, homework projects to get my Nomad visa at all of these places. And I don't even really want to stay for the year. I just want to nomad in and out for 2 or 3 months. And so a lot of digital nomads will say like, this isn't really help. I'm still going to nomad. And if there's this 2 year long visa, I'm just not going to apply for it. It's not what I want. I just want to get in and out. And so I think like the savvy wave of digital nomads is right that it doesn't speak to them. But I think the remote work visas, the verdict for me is somewhere in the middle, where the slightly more like slow moving, regular folk who are like, this is a huge thing for us. We would never go to 6 countries in a year, let alone 3, but we're going to get this nomad visa to do a snowbird thing. Like, we're going to be in Costa Rica 6 months and the US or Canada 6 months. Great. There's a program for it where like there's like a mom and a dad or something who would never like bring their kids like in a semi-legal way to like hop around. They need there to be a system. And sort of these
Mm-hmm.
normies, it is a step in the right direction for the normies to get some kind of system to be able to legally do what they want to do when they want to be totally up and up. I think the critics are totally right for like the savvy crypto libertarian nomad, like deeply involved, deeply online, deeply on Reddit. Not all of these people have way better, they've been doing it for years and this doesn't really change anything for them. And I agree. These visas don't change anything for someone who's already savvy as a nomad that much.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You don't want you don't want to have to do visa runs with your grandma or or a couple of young kids, you know. And think about it, people used to buy property only having tourist visas forever. Like
Yeah.
for a long time, Costa Rica was more popular than Mexico, and all the Canadians and Americans would go down to Costa Rica, and they would just have tourist visas, but they would buy property, and there were people that did that for like 10 years successfully, and then things kind of changed in 2020, and they couldn't even get down to their house because only residents were allowed in, residents and citizens, things like that.
Yeah, that's where I think the stuff that you talk about and a lot of great influencers talk about, the importance of like a second residence or a second citizenship. It's not this just kind of like, it's not like this doomer cult. Like a lot of people look at that and think like, why do you need that? It's like this kind of prepper thing. It's like, it's not even, it's so much more basic than that. It's just like, look what happened with the pandemic. Look what's happening with remote work. Things are changing. And the ability to have that, like in software, you'd say root access to a country and not just like, you know, like editor permission access and we can turn it off anytime. But like getting the root access of a real residency or real citizenship is not something that's crazy. It's not out of reach. It's workable for most people that put their mind to it over the course of, sometimes it's 5 years for the citizenship. It's not super easy, but residencies, like I think people would undervalue if you just told someone in the Cold War or told someone at some other point in history, if you make 2 grand, and I might be even overstating a bit, but let's just say if you make 2 grand a month, you can legally get probably 40 or 45 different countries within a couple weeks and legally allowed to be there. And so I'm
Hmm.
not trying to get into political refugees, war, famine, whatever, but just that freedom, which is still very partial. It's like, it's still just baby steps. We're so much more freedom we could have that we don't have.
Yep.
But just that freedom, it's amazing. This is like an amazing gift. And I think a lot of people don't see it that way. They see it as a liability to head
Yeah.
down somewhere that they don't know. But it's a gift that you could do it if you wanted to, even if you don't choose to.
Yeah, another thing that John Lee put to my attention, who's another remote work advocate and has a company in the space, is he helps companies that have huge workforces, like thousands of people, and some of them want to work remote, right? In these multi-thousand person companies. And there's a liability issue where you basically, let's just say you have 10,000 employees and they're all just running around all over the globe working online in different countries, um, with varying degrees of legalness to them being there and working there. You know what I mean? Because let's just say you're in France and you close a deal over the phone in France, even if you're on a tourist visa, well, you just signed a contract and closed a deal while you were physically in France. And that might come with tax obligations, for example. And so one of the things that digital nomad visas can do, you'd have to check the fine print, but what they can do is sort of regularize your status such that you sort of get a tax exemption for the time that you're there. Whereas if you were on a tourist visa, but you were quote unquote working, in some countries, you would still owe tax. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so increasingly, these very big companies or smaller globally distributed companies or even just big companies that want to sort of manage their risk better, they're looking at digital nomad visas and saying, hey, you can go work in Costa Rica, you can go work in Morocco, you can go work in France, but you better be on a digital nomad visa because we're not dealing with any BS.
Yeah, and I think you bring up an amazing point, and a similar use case. I think almost maybe exactly what you're saying with this with a twist is like big companies now. This is a positive, I think. Where and I'm sure John. And actually, shout out to John. I had coffee with them at an amazing co-working space in Sintra, Portugal,
No
just a
way.
couple months ago. I
Really?
think it was yeah, it was September or October.
You went to
Uh,
Yayem?
yeah, I was at Yayem with them. Yeah, just the afternoon, but it blew my mind. I was like,
Finish your thought. Let's come back to Yayem.
yeah. So, I was going to say it's like you let's take a classic. I'm not sort of picking on any country, but let's just take a classic migratory route for work immigration, India to USA, where it's like this thing of like, oh, we want to hire this Indian engineer. They want to go to the USA. They want to come to Seattle, whatever it is. But like, oh, we got this H-1B process, but we still want the talent because we need to find the talent now. What I'm sure many people, let's just say like someone from India who's trying to uh, from a personal and professional standpoint immigrate to North America, they can say, hey, look, we want to get you started, we want you on the same time zone, but like it might be a year for the H-1B, and before that would put people in kind of like purgatory hell waiting for things to happen, just like shitty stories for lots of people.
Hmm.
Now it's like, hey, there's 30 choices on the same time zone. Could we put you on a Caribbean island or Costa Rica or Mexico or what have you? Our HR team, I'm not saying the world is like this. I think this is what HR teams will catch on to in the next year or two. They
Hmm.
will say, hey, we'll put you on the Bermuda, whatever, the Barbados, Bermuda, Mexico digital nomad visa. You can get very close. You can be a 2-hour flight away from our Atlanta office, et cetera, et cetera. And then throughout the course of the year, you'll be totally legally working while we figure out the much harder thing, which is how to get into Fortress USA. And so we think of digital nomads and remote work about people leaving Canada and the US. That's totally cool. That's the sort of the world that we live in. People go in other places, but it's going to be multipolar. There's going to be things going in every direction. And it's going to be like, there's going to be all this sort of, I think, sort of leveraging of like someone wants to get to the UK, but they can't go there yet. So they go somewhere else. There's still going to be wanting to be people that want to move to Canada, US, and UK, even though that's not my thing, going the reverse direction. So I think that's totally going to be a trend around like just freedom, like and corporations being good partners in it in terms of like helping their employees, like the way I'm sure many of John's forward-thinking clients are doing by working with
Hmm.
him.
Yeah, I have one buddy that his company gave him a list of countries that he could work from. And they said, you cannot work in Nicaragua, you cannot work in Panama, but I think pretty much every other Latin American country was on the table. I guess except like Venezuela, right? And so, and
Yeah.
we had been planning to go to Panama for Carnival, but anyway, but very interesting that companies are now having a say in where you're allowed to work remote and giving you a naughty and a nice list, a blacklist.
Yeah. And I think that's reasonable. I think I've been a CEO, I've been a board member that has fiduciary duty to not break the law at various companies that I've run. And so I see it from both sides point of view. It's not just about it totally 100% empowering the individual without taking into account the needs of the corporation. And I think it's totally reasonable. Like, here's our naughty and nice list. Take it or leave it. If the company down the street has a better one, that's fair power. But like, hey, we've figured out how to work with you in 70 of the countries around the world. If you like what you see, that's our
Hmm.
remote work policy. I think that's totally fair. I don't think countries have to accommodate work from anywhere. I think they can have their naughty list because it's fair to them to not expose themselves to liabilities that they don't want to expose themselves to.
Hmm.
But that's a great system. I think that should be standard in any job offer. It's just the naughty or nice list. I think it's if your nice list is only one country though, I think you're going to slowly be screwed over time. Obviously.
That's a good way to put it. Is that the home country, can't be the only one. You got to have a larger list and give people a list of options. Imagine if you bake that into like the hiring like capabilities or whatever. It's like, hey, we can hire you in any of these 5 countries. We can have you live in any of these XYZ countries, and maybe help you with like visas to get there. Um, these could be like attractive things. And these are things that certainly a couple of years ago, companies were not talking about. It's really only this year that I've heard of um, the example that I just gave about having a list of allowed countries. Like, I think everyone knew you probably shouldn't work remote from Russia or China or the Ukraine, or, or but because you don't want your computer to get hacked or something at a Starbucks. But other than that, like, we kind of thought that everything was open game, but it might appear to not be that way in the future. It depends.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll be cases or high profile cases. Some like for instance, there's a shifting landscape. Bali, Indonesia is a popular place. I was just reading today. Waviator newsletter will probably cover it about how there was a law. I don't want to get the facts wrong, but I'll just say either a law has been passed or has been proposed, talked about, that says
Hmm.
sex outside of marriage is not legal.
Hmm.
Um, and so you never know when even a prearranged agreement might change based on, oh, suddenly there's a different liability landscape for like what kind of trouble a person can get into. And so I think that rather than having zero communication and having the employee just not tell, like obviously that's fun from the employee's point of view. It's not really sustainable. Like a lot of companies just can't sustain that. Like it, so yeah, it'd be interesting to see. And hopefully like my view is just making the nice list as large as possible and empowering people both on both sides of that table. Just like, look, this is the future. Um, People are going to want to do this.
Yeah.
Do the work to make the nice list as long as possible.
So, what are some of the most popular digital nomad visas?
Yeah. So we've seen that the Caribbean islands are popular. There have been a few that have released economic impacts, and over the course of the pandemic, thousands have gone to Barbados. Many of them are very new. So I don't know any data coming out of like Portugal or Spain yet, or Latvia, or various places that have only kind of released it in the last 6 months. So some of the data is opaque, but I can definitely say that what is popular, for what places that are popular for nomads, Croatia, Costa Rica on both of the continents, and Portugal, as it shifts from kind of like a what's the word? It's like a square peg in a round hole for an investor visa that kind of can act like a nomad visa, but it wasn't right. And now they're implementing the new visa. And Portugal is and will be very popular. You can see where, like, I've heard that like Italy announced a visa. They were supposed to have released it this year, but you can tell like from anything I've seen that because of kind of like problems with the website and not that much interest and not that much marketing, I
Hmm.
don't think that the applications are very high. So Mexico is not really a nomad visa place. It's like it's just popular because there's a structure to get there without a nomad visa that's extremely popular. But if I had to guess on the most successful, it'd be um, you know, Barbados, Croatia, Costa Rica, and just in terms of how they're structured,
Colombia.
Colombia. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking of other Latin American ones. Brazil's too new. I think that could be very popular, but it's too new. Not enough data. Not really a year's worth of history yet, or anything like that. But I think that'll be a really interesting question in about a year when we finally have like 30 or 40 countries to compare instead of just like 5 or 6 that have been around for a year or two.
Yeah, definitely. What are some of the differences in the requirements of these digital nomad visas? Do they all require international health insurance? Do they all have a income requirement? What if you're living on savings? Could you show like a bank account with 20 grand, for example? Trying to think what else. I guess those are the two biggest variables. Um, yeah, what are some of the variables at play here?
Yeah, I think the important variables. So starting with one that's almost universal is the healthcare. I can't think of any. I think there's like a list that Harvard did that we wrote about where every single one except one uh, needs healthcare coverage to be proven. So that's universal. Then there's the income is like the next variable. It differs. So there's you go to the Cayman Islands on their program. You're going to be I think you're going to be needing like 5K or more US, if not more, if you have dependents,
Hmm.
all the way down to some places that are kind of sub 1,000. Many of them fall, I would say, like you know as the country is more expensive. I think Dubai is at 3K or 4K even right now, and then a lot of the Latin American countries are closer to 1 or 2K monthly, and then a few. I can't remember what Colombia is, but I think it's on the lower end. So anyway, income is there. It differs, and it does differ sort of in a correlated way with the GDP of the country, although that's not a perfect analogy. Um, Something that I think is meaningful and different is that some of the visas are like you're a temporary resident, so you're still going to pay tax here, but it's like a reduced tax. So if I think about like Portugal or Italy or some other places, you're not necessarily getting like a 0% tax holiday. Whereas the classic one is Dubai. That was zero tax even before digital nomads. Um, if you're on a remote work visa in Costa Rica or USA or even the Croatia one, um, you're getting whether it's 0% tax forever or a 0% tax holiday. It's meaningfully different to have to pay income tax versus not, like in the sense of how people are structuring, am I going to relinquish my home residency? And it's, I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but this is important. Whether if you're an American, you have some leeway, under 100K to kind of transfer your tax somewhere else, or say I'm not an American resident and I'm paying zero tax over here. Um, so anyway, taxation's the one that I think is the most meaningful difference. And then really, most of them, if not all of them, allow you to either be an employee or an entrepreneur. Some of the
Oh,
bad
really?
ones,
Most of them allow that? That's pretty cool.
yeah, I would say some of the, let's say, out of date ones or bad ones are only entrepreneurs. Like for instance, the kind of nomad visa in Czechia or the Czech Republic is like it's almost like prove you're an entrepreneur kind of thing, which I think is not what most employees want to need to do. So they're changing by the month, but employment and entrepreneur status is one variable. The tax situation is probably the most important. The income level is important, and it varies, and healthcare is always there. That doesn't vary. Like you're going to need healthcare. You're going to need a health insurance plan, I should say, no matter where you go. 99.9%.
Yeah, so talk me through health insurance a little bit. I bet you're pretty educated on this more than most average digital nomads. What are the options out there for digital nomads that want international health insurance?
Yeah, so I'm sponsored by Insured Nomad, so I'm going to use them as an example, but I just want to declare my conflict like a doctor talking about pharma drugs. So Insured Nomads does sponsor us, but taking a step back from that, why do they sponsor us? Why would they sponsor a remote work newsletter? The reason is, first of all, let's just define health insurance in these places. And like, what even is health insurance? So in wherever you live, if you're in the United States, it's probably a private company, or if you're older in the United States, it might be the government through Medicare. Um, in Canada, your province will handle your healthcare. In the UK,
OHIP
it's the NHS.
in
OHIP,
Ontario.
yeah, in Ontario. Um, that is, the experience of that. Even though a lot of people have never really used it, and knock on wood, you don't have to use it that much. But that is the idea that whether it's checkups or a slight flu that you need, or a strep throat you need an antibiotics for, all the way through to catastrophic events that are you need surgery, or chronic diseases, as it relates to kidneys or diabetes. That kind of comprehensive universal healthcare or private healthcare in the United States is about providing you the actual healthcare services.
Right.
So,
And here's the thing,
oh, sorry,
right?
go ahead.
Is that maybe I was maybe you're sorry, I'll cut this mumbling, but um and so the thing is that your US healthcare program through United or John Hancock or whatever, it only covers the states. And obviously OHIP in Canada only covers Ontario or maybe all of Canada for emergency situations. And so these are not sufficient for the international healthcare stuff, right? So that's
Exactly. Yeah. So
so
when
fill us
someone,
in. What do we do next?
yeah, when someone travels, they on vacation, what they think of as health insurance isn't health insurance. It's a form of travel insurance that you've done it before. I'm going to a different country. I have my health insurance, but I'm going somewhere. I need this extra stuff. It's basically just like, yeah, we'll give you an ambulance to the emergency room, and then if something happens, like, yeah, we'll fly you home to your, like, if you have chronic kidney disease for the next 15 years, you're not getting that health care in this place that you're in on vacation travel insurance. And so companies like Insured Nomads, like some of the big boys that are sort of moving into this, like whether AXA and big insurance companies, I don't know all their names, but or companies like Safety Wing, what they're doing is saying, it's almost like I'm trying to think of the analogy, but it's like, yeah, we're going to give you the 100 local health insurances, or the equivalent of, in one product. So when you go there and you're like, I'm here for 2 years, I'm gonna get glasses and get insulin and get whatever I need for whatever I'm doing, whatever I need for my healthcare. Um, that it's just like the local health insurance. And so that's a fundamental change from just like, oh, I've got my such and such travel insurance that will fly me home from Mexico if I have a surfing accident while I was drinking or whatever, and blah blah blah. They'll just send me home. So these products, like ones from Insured Nomads and Safety Wing and others, are re-envisioned so that you can kind of be like a local in how you
So it's
interact with health
not
insurance.
just emergency, basically.
Yeah, that's the simple, concise way, is like, not just emergency, actually real health insurance for real health care, not just emergency care.
And so does that mean on these plans, I guess they have different ones, but you could go to the dentist or you could get I don't know, some x-rays done or see the doctor about an issue you're having.
Yeah, I'm not a salesperson for their products, but yeah, but as far as I know, yeah, there's different levels, and you can get all of those things
Right.
like vision,
That's the
dental,
idea, right? Is that
pharma
it's like
plans,
is
all
it's
that stuff.
like how would you put it? Like preemptive care and not just after you break your leg, you know?
Yeah, and I think people that are totally healthy, or whatever you want to call healthy, don't really get this. But for anyone, whether it's from contact lenses, glasses, to type 1 diabetes, to just uh, a wrist injury that you go to physio for, people with conditions kind of need to interact with the healthcare system more than once every 10 years.
Hmm.
And they don't get that from their travel insurance. They're just saying like, hey, if I go to Mexico on vacation for a month, I'm like, uh, I'm like abstaining from healthcare for a month because I'm not around my services. And then once I get back home, I'll start my normal services again. Not just for getting hit by a car, but for just going through life and needing healthcare for glasses or chronic conditions or whatever. And these products aim to allow you to not just sort of like take a break from healthcare because you're not around your home or whatever.
Right. And then a potential next step is you might think, well, I don't even spend time in Canada or the US. I'm a full-time perpetual traveler or digital nomad or whatever. I live in Latin America and I bounce around. Um, you could potentially forego that expensive American health coverage that you're not even using, and potentially just use insured nomads or safety wing or whatever. Because I think it's like, honestly, quite, I think it's like cheaper, like the monthly premiums, right? And uh, there's other parts of this too. Like, it's just so expensive to go to the hospital in the States that even your copay is almost more expensive than just paying cash in most parts of Latin America or Europe sometimes. But yeah, how would that work? Do you know, like, for Americans that they could probably just give up their like stuff back home and only use this travel one?
Yeah, Americans could just not sign up for health insurance. I'm not a tax accountant, so there might be like a box to check based on the Affordable Care Act laws around like if you decline to have health insurance, then you pay a penalty or whatever. That might have been rolled back in the last few years, but like anyway, I'm getting into the details, but the answer is yes. You could simply um, get this healthcare coverage. I will say, not sure of this. I think the products like Insured Nomads and Safety Wings products are almost like, for Americans, this is health insurance everywhere except the US. So check the fine print before you do this. For some of these products, if you choose to forego and kind of like you know move full time to the nomad life or the Latin life, you might be buying a product that's everywhere except the US just because of that reason. But with that caveat, yes, you could sort of shift your health insurance to everywhere else, and probably even pay for some US health insurance back home. Only for the times that you need it when you're there. And, but yeah, lots of interesting things here around like what you give up and how Americans are taxed worldwide versus Canadians who can kind of just establish their residence somewhere else and kind of get out of it, as long as even though they're still a citizen. But that's almost a different podcast with someone smarter than me about that stuff.
Yeah, I think the healthcare is a good theme because I think a lot of the younger nomads, they just sort of like, I don't want to worry about it. I don't even go to the hospital anyway, really. And I think a lot of people just sort of slack on it or procrastinate and don't get coverage they should. And I think when you really do the research and look at it, it's not even that expensive, and it's like probably pretty worth it.
Yeah, the 22-year-old doesn't care if they like missed the dentist for 18 months in a row. But people in their 30s and 40s and 50s, as lame as it is, they do care about that kind of stuff and not missing out on dental hygiene and all this kind of boring stuff that they want in place. I want a program in place that I'm not. If I'm going on an 18-month nomad trip, I don't want to just skip the dentist and come back when I'm done, in my hometown in BC or Alberta or whatever. I want it all to work. I want life to continue.
Yeah, no, it
Is a
totally
big
makes
theme.
sense. Any more tips on the healthcare thing? Um, I think it is a good one. I'm, uh, yeah. Sorry, I'll edit this too. But yeah, any more tips on this healthcare thing? Any more angles that we didn't talk about? I do want to exhaust this theme because I do think it's important.
Well, I think something that will be interesting to look at. I don't really want to give specific healthcare advice, but a framework is healthcare tourism and sort of planning your healthcare, just like people plan certain countries for dating, certain countries for evaluating real estate, certain countries for the weather. I think you will, as much as I want to be idealistic and say like, hey, you know, all healthcare systems are the same. You can be a digital nomad in 100 countries and
Hmm.
get healthcare. The reality is certain countries are better than others at certain things. And so proactively saying like, hey, I think that with this product, this health insurance product, I'm going to be in this country for 4 to 6 months. I've got all these factors I'm considering, but like considering what I want to get done in healthcare, whether it's just glasses and dental and getting some, whatever prescriptions you need, I think just being proactive and thinking like, what's my healthcare plan when I evaluate these countries, and just making a healthcare plan that doesn't have to drive everything, but at least is like a
Yeah.
decision
So
making
so
point
and
is a key
if I
thing.
can ask, so how does it actually work? Uh, so let's talk about the nitty gritty details about how this works. So let's just say I go to the dentist in Mexico, in Colombia, whatever. I'm assuming I probably have to pay cash up front. I get a receipt, and then I'm going to file that receipt with insured nomads? Or how does that sequence of events happen?
Well, I think around the world in different countries, it's going to be a patchwork. So it's not universal, and many places you will pay cash and then file a claim, and then what insured nomads is doing is making sure that they have in place. They're actually not the root insurer everywhere. They're working with the real insurance company, local, national insurance company, all these places, and they get the claim filed with you. I think what you see on the product roadmap, though, is country by country, they're working through a probably many year cycle of getting it so that you can simply share your insurance information and get it um, without a cash deductible.
That'd be
Um,
cool. Or
but
just the copay.
I don't know how much they're there yet, but I have seen where that's sort of working its way into the product roadmap. Um, that's a great question. I don't know if I know the ratio, but I imagine you're still filing the claim, uploading it to the system, and what you're getting from these companies. Again, I'm not selling this. I'm just speaking almost off the top of the dome. Is
Hmm.
like you're getting like, hey, the such and such country's actual system is all in Spanish. Like so. You would have, if you did it direct, you might still have been able to get a local health insurance product and submitted a claim, but you would have had to do a bunch of stuff in Spanish or what have you somewhere. And they're kind of, you're using like a modern digital software product interface to kind of say, here's my dentist claim from this part of Mexico for a chipped tooth, and then insure it. And then they're kind of the friendly interface that works with the insurance company. And again, I'm not inside any of these companies, but I'm sure that they're not literally the insurance underwriter in 100 countries. They're working with partners.
No, I think it's definitely fair to say that they're meeting a need. I think one of them was even like in Y Combinator at some point. So I think a lot of people have faith in this growing as an industry. I even I saw a pitch. I went to like a startup pitch in Toronto in the summer, and this guy was building a website that was like how would you put it? It was like medical tourism packages, and you could basically just browse the packages. And let's just say you wanted like a nose job or something, you'd be like, okay, like nose job Mexico, 3 grand, nose job Colombia, like 4 grand. You know what I mean? And it was like all these different doctors could like offer their packages and stuff like that. I was like, this is hilarious and genius and mixed emotions, right? But uh, yeah, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that was funny.
Well, I think I think there's two sides to it. I think it's an awesome opportunity for people to do medical tourism and sort of for countries to compete on that. But if you think like the gentrification mentions are bad just on like nomads hanging out, imagine what it's going to be for people like swooping in to take advantage of healthcare systems around the world. I think it's the freedom is what's important, but that's like a political topic. I'm sure that will ruffle some feathers.
Jeez, I mean, between birth tourism, medical tourism, there's it's there's a lot of attack vectors, I suppose, or just issues that the digital nomad community needs to iron out or find a way to do it that benefits the local population, let's say.
Absolutely.
Cool, man. So I know we're coming up on an hour and a half. I mean, we did a very good bit about digital nomad visas, another good bit about the healthcare stuff. We talked about um, sort of different segments of the remote work and digital nomad space. Yeah, anything else that you think would be cool to mention, or topics that are getting you excited as a remote work advocate? Like, what are you seeing that gets you excited in the space?
Well, to tie it back to a callback, I think Yayem in that's Yayem, and I might not be saying it right, but
Hmm.
Yayem in Central Portugal. It was just an amazing place, and that was co-working, but not the glass box WeWork model. It's just this beautiful resident. It's like it's like a house, a grounds, an
Yeah,
estate
I've been there. I've
where
been there.
oh, you've been there, yeah. Where
Yep.
pool, places to work, but it's kind of like um, a mix of country club, co-working, co-live, not co-living, I would say, but or at least I didn't see anything like that, and social venue. And I think when I was there, it was having worked in WeWorks or kind of done co-working where it's the typical like, here you go, there's hot desks over there, there's phone booths over there, there's a coffee kitchen area on the second floor and you can go on the third floor, et cetera, et cetera. um, Being a Yayem is like, oh yeah, of course you would choose this setting over WeWork. Like it's just so much more chill and relaxed while also extremely inspiring, productive. Like you're not going to be lazy. You're like, it's pristine beauty. You can sit and work and get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah, I
But
was extremely impressed by it. I guess just to paint a picture for the listeners, Yayem is a new co-working concept in Portugal, and basically they just bought a house on the side of the hill in Sintra, Portugal, overlooking the ocean. So it's like an ocean view house. It has no bedrooms. It's all like working spaces and stuff, and it's very thoughtfully done. It's very clean. I heard that the founders of Yayem are former Uber employees, so they know how to do it right. There was a catered lunch where they had like professional chefs that made lunch for everyone, and there was I don't know, maybe 20 of us, 15 or 20 of us having lunch at a couple long tables, communal tables, all sharing lunch that was prepared for us. And they had like a set menu, they had vegan options, whatever. And we just sort of sat down to lunch. And there was a Moroccan guy, there was a Dutch guy. I was chilling with John Lee, and everyone was kind of just in an organic place where they could work together. There was an infinity pool in the backyard of this house. So there's like an infinity pool, and then obviously that looks over the ocean view. And so it was really nice when the sun set, because when the sun sets in Portugal, it sets over the water. So you had the sun sort of setting over the water, eclipsing the water, and you're sitting there basically like working from an outdoor table or indoors, and it's all like floor to ceiling glass windows and stuff. And the whole place was just very very nice. Like it felt like the nicest cafe you've ever been to, almost in a way. Um, yeah, and I was just extremely impressed. I think it was probably the best co-working space that I've ever been to.
yeah, so I think the future is more of that. Um, a lot of co-working doesn't look like that, and obviously it might have an more upscale price tag just to achieve a certain luxury. But I think there's lots of ocean out there, and there's lots of land, and there's lots of places out there, and I think a lot of people will want to work that way. And that sort of club model, it's not a country club, it's not a co-working space in the way that we normally think of it. It's something in between, and it's almost an idea for many. It'd be an ideal workspace.
Yeah,
So
you're
I think
right
that'll
that
be
it
the
does
future.
have elements of a country club. Obviously, it's not like it's just a house. Like it's like a mansion basically that you can go
Yeah.
visit. And I think it was about 2,300 bucks, 2,300 bucks for like a 1 year membership to be able to go as often as you want. And you can have guests and stuff like that. So it seemed like pretty reasonable, especially if you could just expense that through your company. Um, and they're opening, or they just opened another one in Mexico City, and I think they have plans to build a couple more.
Yeah, I'll be watching that because it's just it's more appealing than a certain type of commoditized co-working space and kind of thing that I've seen 100 of, and that's a trend. That'll be a trend.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you got to see that. I definitely need to get the founders of Yayem on the podcast.
Yeah, that'd be a dope episode.
Yes, sir. All right. So let's get to wrapping up the episode, Curtis. It's been really nice to catch up with you and have this chat. Um, you know what to do. This is your time to promote Waviator and all the great things you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me at Curtis Duggan on Twitter, and you can find Waviator at waviator.com. It's really easy to sign up. There'll be a subscribe button up on that website. That's WAY, Waviator, like aviator.com. And you'll find everything you need there. Past newsletters as well, if you haven't been a subscriber or you're just becoming one. And yeah, we'll see you there. That's the easiest way to find me, and that's the easiest way to find Waviator and all the stuff that I talk about relating to remote work.
And your Twitter handle?
So Curtis, that's Curtis Duggan, Duggan, at Curtis Duggan.
Awesome, Curtis. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure being a guest.